If you've ever trusted someone with your whole life, listen closely, because my wife didn't just leave me during her girls' trip. She emptied our joint account, vanished, and left me staring at a balance that looked like a typo. The worst part, she thought I'd be helpless. She had no idea what I'd already set in motion months earlier, and by the time she found out, it was too late to undo it. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Brennan Quill, and I'm not the kind of guy who snoops, checks receipts, or asks to see your phone. I believed marriage meant you don't keep score. My wife, Laurel Fisk, used to say she loved that about me, that I was steady. She said it like it was a compliment. Looking back, it sounds more like she was measuring how easy I'd be to take from. Her girls' trip was supposed to be a long weekend, spa, shopping, some fancy dinner, the usual. She packed like she was going away for a month, but I didn't question it. I helped carry her bag to the car. I kissed her goodbye. She smiled and said, "Don't work too hard. I'll be back before you know it." That night, I stayed home, did laundry, and made a simple dinner. I was halfway through cleaning the kitchen when my phone buzzed with a bank alert. At first, I thought it was the utility bill. Then I saw the amount. Almost everything we had moved out in a single sweep. I opened the app and my throat went dry. Our joint account, the one we used for mortgage, groceries, and savings, was nearly empty. In the transaction details, the destination was a new account number I didn't recognize. A second alert arrived. Then a third. I called Laurel immediately. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, did you move money? Call me." No reply. I tried again. Nothing. The next message I got wasn't from her. It was another bank alert. The kind that doesn't feel like information. It feels like a warning. I sat down at the table and stared at my hands, trying to make my brain accept what was happening. Because there's a moment in betrayal where you still believe it can't be real, where you assume there's a harmless explanation. That moment didn't last long. Not after I opened our email and saw it. A confirmation that the joint account mailing address had been changed that same afternoon. Changed while I was at work. Changed right before she left town. The next morning I went straight to the bank in person. Listen closely. Because phones are useless. Because my wife didn't just leave me out her girls' trip. The branch manager, emptied our joint account, a calm woman named Maris Kellington, and left me staring at a balance account activity that looked like a typo. And her expression tightened as she scrolled. She thought I'd be Laurel helpless. Had transferred funds. She had no idea what I'd already set in motion months earlier. One large withdrawal, and by the time she found out, space was just enough to avoid automatic holds. Stick with me while I share my story. It also updated the security questions. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel just enough that I'd get locked out if I made the wrong dropping a like. Maris asked me gently if this was an authorized transfer. My name is Brennan Quill. I said, and I'm not the kind of guy who snoops, checks receipts, because saying no meant admitting the person I believed marriage to be my partner had treated me like my wife's Laurel Fisk. Maris explained what I already feared, that I was because it was a joint account. She said it like it was a legal access. Looking back, the bank could flag it sounds more like she was measuring how easy they couldn't reverse it without a court order. Her girls' trip was supposed to be a long weekend, and proving fraud inside a marriage is like trying to catch smoke in your hands. She packed like she was going away. I asked if she'd opened a new account, but I didn't question it. Maris helped carry her bag to the car. Yes, a personal account had been opened recently. She smiled and said, "Don't work too hard. The transfers went there. I'll be back before you know it." I asked for the timestamp. That night, she gave it to me. I stayed home, did laundry, then she added something that felt like a punch. I was halfway through. Laurel had also requested a cashier's check with a large portion. At first, she wasn't just moving the utility bill. She was trying to make it untraceable. Almost everything I walked out of the bank into bright sunlight that felt wrong. I opened the app and my throat went dry. Our joint account, I called Laurel again, the one we used for mortgage, groceries. I called my cousin, Hartley Dane, empty. Because Hartley is the one person in my family. The destination was a new account number. He listened and said, "Brennan, a second alert go on a girl's trip." Then a third. She went on an exit. I called Laurel immediately. That sentence landed hard straight to voicemail. It was so simple. I texted back home, "Hey, did you move money?" I went through the house like I was seeing it for the first time. No reply. I tried again. Closet had gaps. Nothing. Not everything. The next message I got wasn't from her. Passport. It was another bank dresses, jewelry she never wore. The kind that doesn't feel like information. People don't pack those for a weekend. I sat down at the table, the drawer where we kept our file folder with mortgage trying to make my brain accept what was missing. Because there's a moment in betrayal where you still believe it can't be real. She had been preparing while I was still buying groceries for her explanation. I sat down and did the only thing I could do. Not after I opened our email and saw I wrote down facts. A confirmation that the joint account mailing address had been changed that same afternoon. Because when someone betrays you, they don't just steal money before she left town. They steal the story. They try to make you look unstable, dramatic, overreacting. And I could already hear Laurel saying it. It's not what you think. You're misunderstanding. You're being paranoid. So I decided I would not give her a story. I would give her a timeline. By day 2, Laurel finally texted. No griting. No epalegi. Just a sentence that felt like a door slamming. I'm done. Don't contact me. A minute later, we'll talk through attorneys. My stomach turned because the confidence in her words told me she'd already planned the next steps. I didn't respond immediately. I read the messages twice, then set the phone down and stared at the wall until my breathing slowed. When your heart is racing, you make mistakes. Laurel wanted me emotional. Emotional people send reckless texts. Emotional people threaten. Emotional people admit things. I wasn't going to be that. Instead, I called a lawyer. Not the first name on the internet. A referral from Hartley, Sable Rowan, a family law attorney known for being quiet and brutal in court. Sable listened and asked one question I didn't expect. When did you start suspecting this could happen? I told her the truth. Months ago, Laurel began pushing for financial simplification. She wanted fewer accounts, more shared access, everything under one roof. She framed it as intimacy. But I'd grown up watching my father get ruined in a messy divorce. So I'd kept one thing separate. Not secret, just separate. A small account in my name where my direct deposit could be split. Mostly for emergencies. Laurel knew it existed. She just assumed it was tiny and unimportant. Sable's voice stayed even. Good, she said. That means you can keep your mortgage current and avoid being forced into desperation. She told me to freeze my credit, change every password, and, this part mattered most, stop treating Laurel like someone who would suddenly develop a conscience. Brennan, Sable said, she's already acting like an adversary. You need to behave like you understand that. The word adversary made my chest tight, but it also made me feel less confused. Confusion is what betrayers count on. Clarity is what stops them. That afternoon, Sable filed an emergency motion to preserve marital assets. It didn't magically return the money, but it created a record. Laurel's withdrawals, her sudden disappearance, the suspicious cashier's check request. We also requested a temporary restraining order. Not against Laurel physically, but against further dissipation of assets. The goal was simple: stop the bleeding. That night I didn't cry. I was past tears. I felt something colder. The understanding that Laurel didn't just leave. She tried to leave me without oxygen. On day 3, I got a call from Maris at the bank. Her tone was careful. Mr. Quill, she said, there's been activity on the new account that received the transfers. A large outgoing wire was attempted. My heart spiked. Was it successful? I asked. Not yet, she said. It triggered a compliance hold. That hold was the crack in Laurel's perfect plan. She had moved money into her personal account, then tried to send a huge portion out quickly. Fast enough that I wouldn't catch up. The bank flagged it. Time bought me options. Sable moved faster. She contacted the bank's legal team and provided notice of the court filing. The hold became stronger. We requested that the cashier's check be traced, that the wire recipient details be preserved, that nothing be destroyed. It felt surreal, my marriage turning into paperwork and procedural language. But the paperwork was my lifeline. That evening, Laurel called for the first time. Her voice was sweet in a way I recognized as fake. Brennan, she said, we don't need to make this ugly. I almost laughed at the audacity. She had emptied our joint account and vanished, and now she wanted to lecture me about ugliness. I kept my voice calm. Where are you? I asked. She dodged. That doesn't matter. Then she tried a softer angle. I just need space. You'll be fine. That sentence told me everything. She wasn't worried about me because she had already decided my stability was not her responsibility. She said, if you stop fighting, I'll leave you enough to cover bills. Enough. Like she was doing me a favor with my own money. I said one thing. Talk to my attorney. Silence. Then the mask slipped. You really hired someone? She snapped. I didn't answer. I ended the call. A minute later, a text appeared. You think you're smart? You'll regret this. I forwarded it to Sable and added it to the file. Because threats are not power. They're evidence. That night, I walked through the house again, but this time I wasn't looking for what Laurel took. I was looking at what I still had, my name, my calm, my ability to act instead of react. Laurel believed draining the joint account would force me to beg. She didn't know about the protective steps I'd already taken, and she didn't know how prepared Sable was to make the court see the pattern. The next phase wasn't revenge in the movie sense. It was something more satisfying, consequences built from patience. And Laurel had no idea she had already triggered them. By the fourth day, I got a call from Maris at the bank and more like a case file. Her tone was careful. I'd taped a legal pad to the fridge and listed dates, there's been activity on the new changes Laurel had made in the weeks leading up to the large outgoing wire was attempted. Patterns emerged the way they always do when you stop arguing with your memory. I asked and start trusting records. She said. She'd asked to simplify finances right after our tax refund posting. That hold was the crack in Laurel's perfect plan. She'd suggested combining money into her personal account, her name appeared, then tried to send a huge portion out quickly. None of it looked suspicious at the time that I wouldn't catch up. Because love teaches you to interpret coincidences. Time bought me options. Sable Rowan warned me that generosity. She contacted the bank's legal team and provided notice of the court filing. The hold became to show what you agreed to. We requested that the cashier's check be traced, drafted a declaration that the wire recipient details be preserved. The bank alerts, the changed mailing address, felt surreal, the cashier's my marriage turning into paperwork. Each item stood alone, sturdy enough to carry weight without commentary. That evening, meanwhile, Laurel stayed quiet again. Her voice was sweet in a way I recognized as fake. Silence isn't peace, Brennan, it's planning, she said. That afternoon, to make this Maris from the bank confirmed I almost laughed at the audacity in place. She had emptied our joint outgoing wire hadn't cleared, and now she wanted to lecture me the first time since the alerts began. I kept my voice calm. On my side. Where are you? I took a walk around the block and noticed something small. That doesn't matter. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I just anger wants motion. You'll be fine. Fear wants reassurance. That sentence told clarity me wants patience. She wasn't worried about the last because she had already decided my stability was not her responsibility. She said, "If you stop fighting, I'll leave you enough to cover bills." Enough. Like she was doing me a favor with my own money. I said one thing. Talk to my attorney. Silence. Then the mask slipped. "You really hired someone?" she snapped. I didn't answer. I ended the call. A minute later, a text appeared. "You think you're smart? You'll regret this." I forwarded it to Sable and added it to the file. Because threats are not power. They're evidence. That night, I walked through the house again, but this time I wasn't looking for what Laurel took. I was looking at what I still had, my name, my calm, my ability to act instead of react. Laurel believed draining the joint account would force me to beg. She didn't know about the protective steps I'd already taken, and she didn't know how prepared Sable was to make the court see the pattern. The next phase wasn't revenge in the movie sense. It was something more satisfying, consequences built from patience. And Laurel had no idea she had already triggered them. Sable scheduled a preliminary hearing for asset preservation, and I learned quickly how different court language feels from arguments at a kitchen table. Nobody cared how betrayed I felt. They cared about authority, access, and intent. Laurel's counsel argued that joint accounts imply shared decision-making. Sable countered with timing and sequence. How the withdrawals coincided with Laurel's departure, and how the attempt to convert funds into a cashier's check suggested urgency inconsistent with ordinary spending. The judge didn't rule that day, but they did issue a temporary order restricting further dissipation. It wasn't justice, it was containment. Afterward, Laurel texted again, short, sharp lines that accused me of escalating. I didn't reply. Every message went straight to Sable. I was learning a new skill. Not auditioning for forgiveness from someone who'd already decided to leave. That evening, Hartley came by with takeout and a blunt assessment. She thought emptying the account would force you to negotiate on her terms, he said. Now she's realizing you won't. He was right. Laurel had miscalculated the kind of person I become when cornered. I don't get loud. I get organized. The Sable scheduled a preliminary hearing showed up as a preservation. Through counsel, I learned quickly she asked for a living stipend feels from the arguments at a kitchen table. The phrasing mattered. Nobody cared how betrayed I felt. She'd acted cared like about the money authority, was hers by access, right. And intent. Now she needed permission. Laurel's counsel argued Sable that joint accounts imply shared requesting proof of necessity. Sable countered full accounting of Laurel's current resources. How the withdrawals coincided with Laurel's departure, hotel charges, how the attempt to convert funds into a cashier's check contradicted the wholesome image of a budget-minded getaway spending. Sable filed it without rule that day. But they did issue a temporary order restricting further dissipation. Laurel called and left a voicemail that tried a different tone. It was containment. She sounded tired. Afterward, Laurel texted again. I didn't think you'd make this so hard. Sharp lines that accused me of escalating. That sentence told me everything about how she'd seen me. Every message went straight to predictable, useful. I was learning a new skill. I saved the message, not auditioning for forgiveness from someone to remember how easily love can be reframed that when money enters the room. Hartley came by with takeout. I slept deeply for the first time since the bank alerts. She thought emptying the account would force you to negotiate on her terms, but because the rules were finally doing their job. Now she's realizing you won't. He was right. Laurel had miscalculated the kind of person I become when cornered. I don't get loud. I get organized. The week ended with another bank update. The cashier's check Laurel had requested was still traceable, uncashed, its trail intact. Sable coordinated with the institution to ensure preservation. We weren't chasing money, we were preventing disappearance. That distinction mattered. It kept me from spiraling into what-ifs. I spent Saturday boxing up documents Laurel had left behind. Old statements, insurance paperwork, a folder labeled plans. Inside were notes about moving timelines and budgets that assumed the joint account would be available indefinitely. Reading them felt like finding blueprints to a house built on sand. I closed the folder and put it away. There was no satisfaction in seeing how thoroughly she'd planned. Only resolve. When Laurel texted late that night, "We could still handle this ourselves," I didn't respond. The next move wasn't mine to make. It belonged to the process, to the dates on the calendar, to the judge who would soon see the sequence as clearly as I did. Laurel had left during her girls' trip and emptied our joint account believing speed was power. She hadn't counted on restraint. And restraint, I was learning, is what turns momentum around. By the time the second week rolled around, Laurel's cashier's check Laurel had requested was still traceable. The messages coming through her attorney lost their polish. Sable coordinated where there had been carefully worded requests. Preservation. There were now thinly veiled complaints about fairness preventing disappearance. Sable Rowan warned me this phase was predictable. It kept me from spiraling into what-ifs. When people realized speed didn't work, I spent Saturday boxing up documents Laurel had left pressure behind. Came in the form of old delays, insurance paperwork, disclosures, and attempts to frame me as unreasonable. Inside were notes about moving timelines and the court doesn't reward impatience, the joint account, and it doesn't punish silence indefinitely. During this time, reading them felt like I focused on stabilizing a house built on sand. I paid the mortgage for my separate account, put it away, covered utilities. There was no satisfaction in seeing how thoroughly she'd planned. That mattered. Only showed continuity when Laurel texted late that night. Laurel, on the other hand, handle this submitted expense summaries that raised more questions than answers. The next move wasn't mine to travel make. Charges overlapped to the process, girls' trip, the dates on the calendar, a hotel room, the judge who would soon see the under two names on consecutive nights. Laurel had left. The picture forming wasn't one of a woman in emptied distress. Our joint account, believing it was one of someone trying to outrun consequences. She hadn't counted on restraint. I didn't feel vindicated. I was learning. I felt sad that this was the version of her that surfaced when trust stopped protecting her. Sad, but no longer confused. The preliminary ruling arrived on a Tuesday morning. The judge ordered continued asset preservation and required Laurel to provide a full accounting of all withdrawals and attempted transfers. It wasn't a final decision, but it set the tone. Laurel no longer controlled the narrative. The money she'd tried to turn liquid stayed frozen, boxed in by orders she couldn't charm her way around. That afternoon, Laurel tried calling me directly. I didn't answer. Minutes later, a text followed. "You're really going to drag this out?" The phrasing revealed her mindset. For her, dragging it out meant not letting her walk away clean. For me, it meant making sure the truth was seen. I forwarded the message to Sable and went back to work. That ability, to return to normal tasks while something so personal unfolded, felt like growth. I wasn't numb. I was focused. When Hartley checked in, I told him the truth. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to finish. There's a difference, and finishing requires patience. Discovery brought clarity Laurel hadn't anticipated. The judge ordered continued asset preservation and required right down to the minutes a full accounting of all withdrawals. Device logs placed changes during hours. It wasn't a final decision, but her explanation evolved as evidence Laurel no longer controlled the narrative. First, it was confusion. The money she'd tried to turn liquid stayed frozen. The court doesn't like evolving stories. Couldn't charm her way around. It likes timelines. That afternoon, during mediation, tried calling Laurel avoided my eyes. I didn't answer. The mediator asked later questions that demanded specifics. "You're really going to drag this out?" Laurel's answers were vague. The phrasing revealed mine were boring. Boring wins. Dragging it out meant mediator recommending her maintaining the freeze and separating marital making sure the truth was from asset disputes. I forwarded the message to Sable. That separation protected what mattered most. That ability. It kept urgency to normal tasks while something so personal unfolded. Sable told me something I'll never forget. I didn't escalate. I was focused. You stabilized. When Hartley checked in, that's why this is going your way. I walked out into the parking lot. I was trying to finish. The knot in my chest loosened. There's a difference, just a little. And finishing not because patience. Laurel was losing ground, but because I was no longer standing on it. That night, alone in the house, I finally allowed myself to feel the grief I'd postponed. Not just for the marriage, but for the future I'd pictured so clearly it felt promised. I wrote down what I'd learned in the margins of an old notebook. Rules I didn't know I needed. Trust needs boundaries. Love doesn't cancel accountability. Silence is powerful when it's chosen, not imposed. Laurel sent one last message through counsel asking for a private conversation to get closure. Sable advised against it, and I agreed. Closure isn't a meeting, it's a decision. I decided to let the process finish without adding my voice to the noise. The next phase would be slower, quieter, and final. Laurel had left during her girls' trip, believing money would buy her freedom. What she was learning instead was that freedom built on deception collapses under scrutiny. And I was prepared to wait as long as it took. That final hearing alone in the house, dramatic the way I finally allowed myself to feel the grief. There was no sudden confession, no not just for the marriage, no moment for the future I'd pictured so clearly it felt promised. It was quieter. I wrote down what I'd learned in the margins of an old notebook. The judge reviewed the accountings, rules I didn't know I needed, the bank trust records, needs boundaries, and the court-ordered love doesn't cancel accountability. Struggled to keep consistent. Silence is powerful when Sable it's chosen, Rowan spoke only when necessary. Laurel sent one last message through counsel asking for a private Laurel's attorney argued mitigation, closure, stress, Sable advised against marital breakdown. And I agreed. But mitigation doesn't erase patterns. It's a decision. When the ruling came, I decided to let the process finish. The frozen funds were to remain preserved. The next phase would be slower, return to the marital pool pending final Laurel had left during her girls' sanctions issued believing money would buy her freedom. It wasn't learning instead. It was enough to reset the balance. Deception collapses under scrutiny. As I listened, I felt something prepared to wait as long as it took. Relief without triumph. I wasn't winning against Laurel. I was reclaiming ground that never should have been contested. When we left the courtroom, Laurel didn't look at me. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who had bet everything on speed and discovered that patience lasts longer. In the weeks that followed, consequences arrived quietly. Laurel's plans stalled without the funds she assumed were hers to spend. The lifestyle she'd stepped into during the girls' trip proved unsustainable without constant cash flow. Paxton, who had once seemed like a permanent fixture, faded out of the picture as reality set in. I didn't track it closely. I didn't need to. My focus was on finishing the separation cleanly and rebuilding stability. I refinanced the house into my name alone, simplified my finances in a way that actually made sense, and kept every payment current. The calm that settled over my days felt earned. Friends asked how I was holding up, and for the first time I could answer honestly. Steady. Not happy yet. Not healed. But steady. That steadiness mattered more than vindication. The last communication from Laurel came through her attorney as a brief Laurel's plan stalled without the funds she assumed were hers to spend. No personal message. The lifestyle she'd stepped into during the girls' trip just unsustainable without I realized then that I didnn't need closure from her, who had once closure had come from understanding who she became, faded out of the picture thought she could leave without consequence. I didn't track it closely. That knowledge hurt. I didn't. But it also freed me. My focus was on finishing the conversations in my head and stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I refinanced the house. Betrayal isn't a failure of vigilance. Simplified my finances. It's a failure of character made the betrayer's part and kept every. I spent more time with Hartley. The calm that settled over my days felt earned and rebuilt trust. Friends asked how I was holding myself first, and for the first time I could answer honestly. As I realized I hadn't checked my bank app. Not happy yet. I smiled. Not healed. Peace isn't loud, but steady. It's the absence of mattered more than vindication. Looking back now, Laurel's girls' trip wasn't the moment everything went wrong. It was the moment everything became clear. She believed emptying our joint account would force me into panic and submission. She didn't know about the safeguards I'd already put in place, the separate account, the instincts sharpened by watching someone else lose everything years earlier. She thought speed was power. What she learned instead was that preparation beats haste every time. I didn't get revenge in a dramatic sense. I didn't humiliate her or ruin her life. I did something quieter and more lasting. I protected myself, held my ground, and refused to let deception decide my future. When I finally moved forward, I did it without looking back, not because I was bitter, but because I was done. Done explaining. Done reacting. Done confusing love with surrender. She left me during her girls' trip and emptied our joint account, believing that was the end of the story. She had no idea it was the moment mine finally began.